Hi, I'm Mason, your tour guide, and today I will be showing you a brief look inside the lives of World War I soldiers. Our job in the war, defend the front line. We had to make sure that no one would get past us, and we had to try to move our defenses upward and forward until we would eventually win. And here we have an everyday soldier in his usual attire. He's wearing the new Brody combat helmet made of steel, and his dress attire. He's mostly wearing khaki for his pants and tunic. For his boots, he is wearing the trench boot, an American combat boot made for the later stages of the war. The Ross rifle was a straight pull bolt action. It was a 0.3-inch caliber produced in Canada from 1903 to 1918. And if you don't mind, sir, would you mind standing up and giving a few poses for us? Oh, well, thanks anyway. The equipment they were using wasn't as good as the marketers made it sound. Sometimes the Ross rifle one would jam when it got wet, so many soldiers suffered wounds, and one of the worst parts about it was medical care that you had to provide for yourself. Trench foot, which, if untreated, would lead to swelling and even decay. Malnourishment was another horrible part of the war. For limited food supplies, all soldiers had to get equal rations, which was never enough. Sometimes a soldier got over-anxious or curious and peeked over the side of the wall. The trenches were always under constant fire, so the soldiers always lived in fear. One of the few things in the soldiers' lives that made it slightly bearable was sometimes they would get mail from families that included items that they would enjoy, such as food, clothing, letters, and other types of care packages for them to enjoy during the war to keep their spirits up. Sometimes, soldiers would trade amongst themselves. Lice was another issue in the trenches. Soldiers didn't have the luxury of being able to clean themselves, so nothing could be done about them. The trenches were also breeding grounds for many rodents and nests, mostly because of the large food supply of dead bodies. To get out of leaving the trench, or even fighting in the war, many soldiers and able-bodied young men would harm themselves. Some even went to the lengths of shooting themselves. Sometimes a soldier's mental state would be affected, so sometimes on the battlefield they even lost it. The soldier's job, well, the most important one, was to make sure that no enemies came close to the line, and make sure they stayed away from the trenches. So patrolling and watching was a huge part. And the worst part about this was, soldiers had to do this for the entire day to make sure the soldiers weren't vigilant and didn't look out for enemies approaching, and they could easily be killed by incoming invaders as they enter the trenches. In battle, your commanding officer's word was law, and if you disobeyed them, wanted to try to get away from them, they would take no hesitation in shooting you on the spot for acts of cowardice and disobedience. Desertion was another crime, and the punishment was death. It would be the same as disobeying your officer and running away. They would shoot you before you escaped, or you would be killed by a firing squad. It was hard to see, so many just took this opportunity to refortify their bases and repair damages to their walls. For some, if they could understand German or the other languages of the enemies, you would have to crawl across the entirety of no man's land in an attempt to spy on the enemy's plans and report back to your superiors. And many times, spies were encountered on both sides, and the soldier would have to play dead or else face the possible chance of being killed by the other spy. But sometimes the soldier would get impatient and attempt to kill the other spies they were approaching. Sometimes, knowing that guns would give them away, they used blunt objects, such as rocks. Even during the night there was still little comfort, considering the soldiers had to treat them in terrible living conditions. Freezing cold, torrents of rain, the sound of blazing gunfire and shells still falling all around. Leaving the trenches was the most feared part in the entire battle. For leaving the trenches meant being encountered with gunfire, shells, explosives, and encountering other enemies along the way. Death usually occurred soon after. Leaving the trenches and coming back alive would be an incredibly difficult task, so many soldiers took their personal and precious items, or lucky objects along religious ones, and used them on the battlefield as they went out in an attempt to maybe alter their fate. Sometimes soldiers wouldn't have the courage to go out and risk their lives, so their commanding officers gave them a shot of rum in an attempt to make them drive away their fear, to send them out. But even with this extra courage, it didn't make them impervious to the various weaponry of the opposition. Even if a soldier did make it into the trenches, he would be quickly shot down by the many soldiers that occupied them. Christmas was a different time for many reasons, but the biggest was when, for one day, we all put down our weaponry and engaged in camaraderie. We forgot about which side we were on. On that day, we sang carols together. We played games of soccer, and some of us even traded gifts. After these new friendships were formed, some couldn't go back to just killing each other, and this was one of the reasons that the trench fighting stopped.